Okay, hello everyone. Good evening. Hello, thank you so much for coming and thank you for your patience. So we're a few minutes late starting. My name is Vicky Fletcher and I work here as an archivist at the Hive, and I also work as a community project officer. I need to say before we start, it's a bit of an experiment. We are recording this evening, not the audience, but we're recording the talk. We don't know if it's going to work, so it's a bit of an experiment. But we would have let you know in advance, but we weren't sure it was going to work. so just to make you aware, so none of you are being, but just to make you aware that talk is working. So I'm going to be talking to you this evening about a project undertaken by Worcestershire Archaeology back in 2017-22, when we excavated part of the site of the 1651 Battle of Worcester during development works to expand. Can you all hear me, by the way?
Yes.
Not very well. Right, I will try and speak up. When we excavated part of the site of the 1651 Battle of Worcester during development works to expand a section of the A440 Worcester Southern Link Road. We'll look at how the battlefield surface was located, the finds, and some of which some of you had a look at. Some of them are in a case over there. We can all have a look later on. And then we'll see what light this can shed on the battle and what it was like for those who fought. So firstly, what I want to say is I'm not an expert in the Civil War period, but so important to preface it with that. But I'd like to begin by talking a bit about Worcester itself, so we can put the project into context. It was the final and conclusive battle of the English Civil Wars and was fought in and around the city. It was a conclusive battle because it resulted in the defeat of the Royalist cause and victory for Oliver Cromwell and the parliamentarians. It was a momentous battle because its outcome shaped the governance of the country from then on. Though Charles Stuart was to successfully reclaim the throne in 1660 after and become Charles II, the power the monarch held was much changed from the time of his life. The divine right of kings to rule had ended forever, and Parliament was more powerful than ever before. This political momentum continued and eventually resulted in the Bill of Rights of 1689, which established that the monarch could not rule without Parliament's consent. Documentary evidence suggests the Battle of Worcester began early in the afternoon of the 3rd of September 1651 on a floodplain to the south of the city, near to where the rivers Severn and Teme merge. In these early stages, fighting was focused around the nearby Powick Bridge. Here's this fancy thing. Is around around here, this kind of area. Yeah, around there, which was a key strategic point. The parliamentarian troops heading into the city from Upton-on-Severn needed to cross it to continue their progress into the city. The Royalists were obviously expecting this. It's thought they had some kind of lookout post on Powick Church Tower, which itself sustained damage in the conflict. So as well as destroying the two northernmost piers of the bridge in readiness for the parliamentary attack, which is a strategic tactic that's seen elsewhere, such as Upton-on-Severn, they'll destroy part of the bridge so it could be crossed. They'd taken up defensive positions in the surrounding fields to defend the bridge and the city beyond, which you can see here. So here are the parliamentarians' troops, and the white blocks here are the Royalist troops. And you'll notice, well, you've already noticed clearly, there's a green box on the map there, and there's also the green box here and the flood compensation area. So these are important, and we'll come back to them later, so remember these. So, as I said, in 2017 to 22, Worcestershire Archaeology had a really exciting chance to explore part of this area of the battlefield, due to works taking place to widen part of the A440 Worcester Southern Link Road and convert it to dual track. Works focused around the Carrington Bridge, which was named after Councillor Ron Carrington, who was a leading advocate of the need for a bridge to ease the traffic flow from the city centre, and it was built in 1985. But here's the bridge during the recent development work. And here it is under construction. But unfortunately, archaeological investigation didn't take place when the original bridge was built in 1985. But now the road was being widened, there was another chance to see what might lie beneath. Over the years since the bridge was first built, the line of the A440 has also come to define the southern border of the battlefield, as registered by Historic England, as you can see here, which is a bit odd really, as fighting is known to have extended across fields further to the south. So as I mentioned, the area we're working on is a floodplain. And the thing with floodplains is often they look like this, which can be inconvenient, to say the least. But for this project, the location of the site on a floodplain was actually key to its success. During periods of flooding, fast-flowing floodwater leaves layers of clay, silt and sand deposits, known as alluvium, and these layers build up over time. So the actual ground on which the soldiers fought is no longer the surface we see today, but lies beneath layers and layers of the more recent river alluvium, built up over numerous flooding incidents that have occurred since the time of the battle. Often, archaeologists use geophysical survey techniques like magnetometry and resistivity, which are different ways to see what's going on underneath the ground. And they usually might pick up features like ditches and pits and walls, for example. And this helps the archaeologist then to focus excavation effectively. However, these techniques were unlikely to help us in this instance because we weren't expecting any large, significant defensive structures. We were expecting scattered artefacts really to be all that was going to remain. So how could we find the battlefield? So we needed to take an innovative and somewhat experimental approach. So optically stimulated luminescence, or OSL for short, is a well-established technique, and it's used to date sediments by determining when certain minerals within them were last exposed to light. So we knew it had been used successfully for deeper within the Severn Valley, but the technique had been little used for such recent periods as the 17th century. Quite how effective it would be for this project was therefore unknown, but by taking a number of OSL samples from different depths, we hope to find the buried 17th century horizon. Here you can see Philip Toms, who is Professor in Physical Geography at the University of Gloucestershire, who carried out the OSL dating. He's on site here taking OSL samples during the excavation, one of the evaluation trenches. So this diagram shows alluvial layers marked within the OSL sample dates. So we can see how the battlefield level was identified. Next to it is a map to show you the location of those trenches on site. So this is the green box I was talking about just now, in a little bit more detail. So here you can see trench 1 is here. So this is trench 1 broken into its different contexts. And trench 1A is up here. And the red dots are where they took the OSL samples from. So across the majority of the site area, there were multiple alluvial deposits visible, and they were typically recorded within the lower 1.5 metres of the trench, below topsoil and subsoil, and continued to depths below the limit of excavation. We found a sequence of at least 3 distinct alluvial layers, which are shown here as context 103, side 104, and 105. So you'll have to believe on this next bit because they were quite different colours, but the diagram doesn't really show that. But trust me, they were. So the lowest deposit was dark yellow, grey-brown clay silt, the top part of which was normally located between 1.26 metres to 2.9 metres, 2.09, sorry, metres below the ground surface. OSL dated samples from this layer to the late Roman and Anglo-Saxon period. So above this, there was a mid-reddish grey brown clay silt, the top of which began between 0.70 metres and 1.11 metres below ground surface, closer to the rivers, as shown here, but at 0.55 metres and 0.68 metres in the southern part of the site, near the flood compensation area. It's a bit further south from where we are here. The samples taken from this layer were dated to the late Anglo-Saxon into the medieval period, and the uppermost alluvial layer was comprised of a mid-reddish orange brown clay silt, the upper part of which was found at 0.28 metres to 0.40 metres across most of the site, below the topsoil and subsoil, as shown here. This layer varied in depth across the site, and as well as reflecting the rising nature of the landscape away from the rivers, it was clear that modern potato growing meant the alluvial layers in some parts of the site had been disturbed. Dating evidence suggested that the upper alluvium had formed during the medieval to post-medieval period and was the key horizon in terms of dating and identifying the 17th century battlefield. So this is context 103 here. The first OSL results from Trench 1 suggested it would be possible to establish a dating sequence for the floodplain alluvium. This was really encouraging. So a second batch of samples were collected by Professor Toms, which extended into the very uppermost part of the alluvium in Trench 1A. The highest sample returned a date of AD 1590 to 1650. Putting all the data together revealed a consistent sequence of alluvium deposits that suggested the top few centimetres of the upper alluvium had likely formed during the 17th century. As work progressed, however, it soon became clear that this information should not be applied too broadly. Better preservation was identified where traditional water meadows, used to cultivate hay and protect from ice and frost, had continued in use beyond the 17th century. Fortunately, this better preservation applied to much of the land closest to the route of the road widening. With this new knowledge in place, we could now begin to target areas for artefact recovery because we had found the battlefield. Yay! Really, really exciting. Okay. So now things could get even more interesting. It was time to bring in metal detecting, and now we knew where we needed to focus our effort. We could closely integrate this work with the main soil stripping for the road construction. And thanks to Dean, who's a very experienced metal detectorist, finds soon began rapidly emerging from this horizon of the kind you'd expect from an area known to have seen battle. A lot of these were lead shots of varying sizes, and most commonly were musket balls. And here you can see Dean in action. Okay. So our efforts focused on two main areas. The footprint of the new dual carriageway, which being on a high embankment was much larger than just the road itself, and a large lagoon established to the south as a flood compensation area. So again, this is the map we looked at earlier. Here is where that green square is, field boundary, and down here, that's the flood compensation area. The lagoon area is close to Poet Church, which I've already mentioned was possibly a royalist observation post for impact. Damage from musket shot can still be seen in the fabric of the church tower. In more recent times, the lagoon area has been used for potato growing, an intensive form of agriculture that has heavily disturbed the upper alluvial horizon and mixed this material within the higher layers of subsoil and topsoil. This resulted in lots of finds from the topsoil, which were not well preserved due to ploughing and other ground disturbance. And the area along the line of the new road, however, which is along here, it produced higher quality data with finds sealed in their original context, still large as they fell in September 1651. And as work progressed, it eventually also became clear that the spatial distribution of the finds corresponded with landscape features as shown on the earliest available mapping, particularly coinciding with field boundaries, as you can see here. So on this sort of zoomed in part of the map, you can see a lot of these finds are coming up along this historic field boundary, which is interesting. So the importance of it really can't really be overstated. It's never been done before to locate finds from a secure battlefield context, civil battlefield, in this way. It's just never been done. So it's completely new. And this innovative approach that we took has really paid off. So now we've talked a bit about finds, we can now look at them in more detail. So to give you an idea of the different kinds of shot that were found, here you can see examples of on the left, side the screen, and musket shot next to those, just slightly bigger. In total, we recovered 50 lead shots of varying types, all compatible with weapons used in the Civil War. As firearms weren't standardised at this time, overlaps in shot sizes are inevitable, and this can make the identification of weapons used somewhat challenging. But despite this, we were able to determine 30 musket balls, all of slightly varying size, 10 pistol shots, 5 carbine shots, and 2 buckshots, which are used in multi-ball loads. Muskets were larger weapons used by the infantry or foot soldiers. It's notable that most of the musket shot we recovered appears to have been used for use with bastard muskets, which are a smaller, lighter, more compact version of the traditional musket, and they could be fired effectively without the need for a musket rest, rather than the larger, medium, or full, although all sizes were present. Pistols and carbines were designed for use by cavalry soldiers because they were smaller and lighter, and generally much more suitable for using. A bit lighter and easier to use, like the soldiers got. Yeah. Interestingly, the largest spread of musket shot found within the upper alluvium was grouped together, along with other items near a former boundary ditch, some 140 metres east of the old route to the bridge. Many of these show signs of their manufacture, but only some showed evidence of fired. And just to show you what the difference is, between shot that's been fired and not, just look at some of these examples. So over here, this is suspected musket shot that's impacted, so we assume fired. And down here, you've got some smaller, and so I think these are pistol shot. You can see the difference between this one hasn't been fired, so it's been dropped, hasn't been used, and you can see these two have impacted. So it changed the shape of them really quite dramatically. So this cluster could be a snapshot of the midst of the action in this area. It's possible the unused shot was dropped while this boundary was being used as a defensive position, and it brings the human experience of the battle into sharp focus. It's easy to imagine trembling fingers desperately trying to reload as the enemy advanced. On this point here. So firearms became more and more sophisticated over the course of the 17th century, but they still required a number of accessories to load and operate them. Musketeers wore a belt slung over the shoulder, known as a bandolier. You can see that in the image here. Bandolier here, slung over his shoulder. And these held a series of small wooden cylinders which each contained a single charge of gunpowder. The caps for these cylinders were often made of lead, and we found a number of them during this excavation. As you can see here, once used, they lose their original shape, but they would have had a circular base and an oval mouth, 2 loops at the side, and you can see on this example here where the loops have been flattened. But those loops originally would have meant the cap could be attached separately to the bandolier so that they could be removed without the possibility of being dropped and lost. Powder charge caps are often found on 16th to earlier 18th century battlefields, though usually in the topsoil rather than in the precise location where they were originally lost. But here, thanks to the good preservation of battlefield deposits and innovative archaeological techniques used, a powder charge cap was found sealed in the upper alluvium. So it's this one, which is also in the case over there. So you can have a look a little bit later on. So that was found in a sealed context. So it was among the cluster of musket shots by the field boundary that was now, with along with a lead priming flask nozzle, which is down here. There's an image of that down there. The nozzle for a priming flask. So it's a spout on a small flask used to dispense fine grain powder for priming the weapon before it was fired. And that was also worn on the bandolier. Wealthier upper class soldiers sometimes had more ornate decorated versions of these items, but these finds are like pretty standard issue and so could be an indicator of more ordinary soldiers, perhaps of limited means. In the lagoon area, a little further south, near to Powick Church, there was a more varied selection of finds, which, although not all from a sealed context, were still valuable in building up a picture of the battle. These finds demonstrate the presence of multiple troop types in this area. As well as lead musket, carbine, and pistol shot, we were also finding artefacts of a slightly more personal nature, such as 16th and 17th century silver coins, clay pipes, buckles, harness mounts, horseshoes, and at least one spur that could all be Civil War period losses. In addition to these were miscellaneous lead pieces that were possibly carried by troops for melting down and recasting into fresh shot. So this is a known practice for which evidence has been seen elsewhere. Though some of these items are not from sealed layers and may have moved some way from where they originally dropped or lost, the emergence of personal effects such as these begins to offer a tantalising glimpse into the troops and their mixed social status. So just to, we've looked at these already, this shot, carbine and musket shot, and the lead powder charge caps. Down here we've got the buckle. I'll talk a bit more about these in a minute. And here we've got, these are harness mounts or strap fittings. Pretty good. Okay. So, 2 silver coins were found in this area, and this is just 2 sides of the same coin, so this is just one of them. So 2 silver coins were found that may relate to the Civil War period. A worn grate of Mary I, who reigned from 1553 to 1558, was found in the topsoil, and a halfpenny of James I, who reigned from 1603 to 1625, which is here on the screen, was found in a secure context within the upper Legion. So although both coins were found in later deposits and could be unrelated losses, their presence on a Civil War battlefield fits with evidence from documents, boards, and other site finds. Marion groats, for example, played an important role in mid-value silver currency throughout the Elizabethan and Stuart periods and appear in English hoards buried as late as the 1640s and 1650s. While Jacobean halfpence were too low a value to be hoarded, they theoretically remained legal tender until the Great Recoin of 1696, and similar finds have been recorded from Civil War sites like the London Lines of Communication. If you've not heard of those, they're extensive defensive fortifications built around London in 1642 to 43. They were commissioned by Parliament. So considering this evidence, it's possible that these coins are losses from the point person of Civil War soldiers. And if that is the case, they would have had the combined face value of around half a day's pay for a parliamentarian infantryman. It's also, as you can see here, really tiny. This is why I try to make these photos as big as possible. But you can see there's this sort of Scotland one. Okay. So this is also in the case over there. You can have a look at it. This copper alloy spur was found in the topsoil in the lagoon flood compensation area. It looks to be a star-shaped rowel. So in the later medieval period, a type of equestrian spur was developed with a small rotating disc of rowel at the end. And these were used to put pressure on the horse's sides and were more precise and less harmful to the horse than the earlier Prince spurs in the medieval period. And the example we found is of medieval to post-medieval date. And you can see it has 6 evenly spaced points radiating from a central hole where it would have been connected to the spur, similarly to this example here. So this is in the collections of the V&A, and it's a bit earlier. It's thought to be of early 15th century date. But we think probably this is from an item that looked a bit like that. So several buckles were recovered from the lagoon area, and of particular interest is this copper alloy example, which, as you can see, has a distinctive shape. It could be part of a double-linked form of shoe buckle, so known as a spectacle buckle, due to their resemblance to a pair of glasses, or a figure-of-8 buckle. These buckles were at their most popular between around 1450 to 1650. After this time, they gradually fell out of use. They were superseded by other types of buckle as styles and fashions changed. And they had largely fallen out of use by the early 18th century. Again, although its degradation in the ground would have led to the inevitable loss of much of any decorative detail that may have been originally present, and there might not have been anything on here at all, it might just have always been really plain. It does appear that it's of a fairly simple form. If it's a Civil War period loss, it would have been fairly run-of-the-mill and perhaps even slightly old-fashioned by the point of the Battle of Worcester. So this could be another insight into the social status of those fighting. Speaking of more decorative items, a series of small floral harness mounts or strap fittings were found in both the topsoil and stratified, so within the upper alluvium in the lagoon and flood compensation area. So these examples are made of lead, but often you also find them made of copper alloy. Strap fittings served a functional purpose. They connected the straps on a horse's cavalry harness, which kept them secure, which was pretty vital during the battle. Like other items we've looked at, plain and highly decorated examples exist despite their functional purpose. So could these items possibly indicate the presence of soldiers who were more able to afford decorative items? Possibly. And I put an image here. So firstly, this is not a Civil War period horse, and much of what it's wearing is not Civil War period, but it's the only example of a horse wearing a harness with harness mounts that I could find. So just to give you an idea of the sort of where they'd be worn, really. Okay, so here you can see a thinly wrought metal item. So it's possibly a very thin moulded handle, or perhaps a broken fragment from the guard or quillon of fine sword such as a rapier. Initially, these were quite plain, but they became more decorative over time. It was found within the upper alluvium, close to the position of a former boundary ditch, visible on 18th and 19th century mapping. Whilst rapiers and similar weapons are known to have been used by both sides during the Civil War, its presence could indicate a higher social class of soldier. During the Civil War period, all soldiers, royalist or parliamentarian, cavalry or infantry, would have carried swords, although many of them were unlikely to have been trained to use them. If it's part of a sword, it wouldn't be the first such item to be found around this area. You may know in the collections of museums of Worcestershire, it's what's thought to be a Civil War period sword, which was found near the Pope area. It's thought to be from the 1642 conflict. So there's a picture of that just down there. And this is just an example of what we could be looking at. We could be looking at, this could be part of this sort of guard or sword. So as you can see, we had some really lovely, really interesting finds. But what can they tell us about the battle? Well, the finds from this project are really very special, as despite being generally fairly typical Civil War battlefield and comparable to those found at other sites, such as the Battle of Edge Hill, what makes them so special is that on most battlefields, artefacts relating to conflict are usually found in the topsoil, often as a result of ploughing or other redevelopment churning up the ground. This in turn means that the physical remnants of battle often become damaged and are also vulnerable to piecemeal discovery by metal detecting as they're close to the surface. But these finds are different. They're surprisingly intact. And not only that, many are also recovered from where they fell to the ground in the heat of battle. Such as here, you can see a musket ball, which is excavated from its position in the upper alluvium of the battlefield. They're unique in this. They're the first and only, so far, such finds to be systematically recorded as largely in situ from a sealed horizon. So in this case, within an alluvial layer. and therefore retrieved directly from an intact 17th century battlefield landscape. Not only this, they corroborate information from primary documentary material, giving a fuller picture of the battle overall. This is all the more powerful in bringing the heat of battle to life. The social aspects are brought into sharper focus, the fear those fighting must have felt, and the desperation when they felt their defensive positions were under threat. We can now take a step closer to imagine what the battle may have been like, and so feel an increased connection to it. When thinking of the Civil War and those who fought, often we imagine that the royalist force consisted of more upper-class individuals, whilst the parliamentarians were generally of a lower social standing. We also assume that people fought for one side or the other. But as we might expect, the reality is a lot more nuanced than that. Landowners often fought for the royalist cause, but so too would the men they employed, with very little choice in the matter. And the majority of the royalist army at the Battle of Worcester were Scottish soldiers, and the Scottish army had supported the parliamentarians earlier in the conflict. The location of this part of the battle within the alluvial landscape of the River Severn and River Team floodplain is key to protecting the archaeological evidence of the battle for the future. Here you can see the stilts close up. So note the difference in the level of the topsoil of the arable lagoon area. So it's here. All this is sort of topsoil and subsoil. So this is the area that's been ploughed, it's been used for intensive agriculture. You can see the difference that's made. Over this side, we've got an example of the pasture field next to the link road. So you can see here it's been much less disturbed. The distribution of the finds is also important to think about. It supports our existing knowledge of the battle gained through documentary sources. We hold lots of relevant documents in the archives here at the Hive, like this one, which is a parliamentary pamphlet produced days after the battle, which tells us that the approach route between Powick Village and the bridge over the River Team was heavily contested, and that it became a major frustration for the parliamentarians. It tells us all advanced towards the enemy, who had lined their hedges thick with men. The hedge lanes, ditches, and small strip fields in this area meant that the movement of troops, especially cavalry, was slow and laboured. This is a picture that is enhanced by finds from the western side of the old lane leading to Powick Bridge, which includes a low-density grouping of pistol and buckshot, as well as a lead token, a horseshoe, and clay pipes. This could suggest that cavalry had tried to stay off the roadway nearby. In any case, it was too narrow to be a useful means of advance. When considering documentary sources, we do, of course, always need to be mindful of who was creating them, in this case, the parliamentarians, and their reason for doing so. As the victors of a significant battle, they were naturally keen to get their version of events into print and circulated as widely as possible. That the archaeology found during the course of this project supports elements of these sources is inherently valuable, as it gives added validity to this version of events, and so contributes to the continual development of knowledge and understanding of battle. So to the east of the road, a high density concentration of artefacts was directly associated with the former field boundary. Here, the numerous lead shot was all from the smaller, lighter bastard muskets, so it's likely demonstrating an infantry confrontation. Other finds from this area include a powder charge cap, a priming flask nozzle, we've talked about and seen, rolled lead, worn illegible copper alloy coins, pewter plates, a horseshoe, and fragments of iron. In combination with the musket shot, these finds probably indicate this was part of the defensive position. The occupation here of a boundary, likely comprising a ditch and a hedgerow, there's a slight ditch which might have been a later replacement boundary, correlates well with primary descriptions referencing hedge-to-hedge fighting that required close engagement. A letter from Oliver Cromwell, which we also hold here at the Hive, a pamphlet, printed pamphlet of, to the Speaker of the House and Commons, written on Saturday, the 6th of September, 1651. And it gives a frantic picture of the heat of battle. It describes how the parliamentarians beat the enemy from hedge to hedge till we beat him into Worcester. We also hold this rather fantastically titled pamphlet of collected letters relating to the battle. It's called An Exact and Perfect Relation of Every Particular of the Fight at Worcester. So, yes, not exactly modest, which tells us the enemy lined their hedges thick with men, but it pleased the Lord, after some sharp dispute, ours beat them from hedge to hedge. So this quote also reminds us too how important religion was at this time. Both sides feeling they were fighting in the name of God, and such a victory is clearly seen as a sign of God's approval. So to finish, we'll come back to this image from the beginning, but hopefully you'll feel like you know them a little better now. Overall, the numbers of finds from the excavation might seem quite small for such a significant battle. However, we were limited in the areas that we were able to investigate through the development. Given the vast size of the battlefield, the potential for similar finds across its full extent is considerable. Significantly, for the continued survival of this material, the productive level of the 17th century battlefield is beyond the reach of metal detectors used at the surface today. Thereby, it's preserved for future detail recording. The archaeological focus identified by the innovative techniques used in this project is confirmed by the artefacts it has produced and will provide a solid basis for future research, the potential for which is certainly also there in the range of archival material that we hold here in the Hive that relates to the battle and the Civil War in Worcestershire generally. My talk this evening is based on an article by Derek Hurst and Richard Bradley, which was first published in the January-February 2023 issue of British Archaeology magazine, and the unpublished Worcestershire Archaeology report, the link or the full title of which you have here. And this is available online through the Archaeological Data Service. The project was undertaken by Worcestershire Archaeology for TACP UK Limited, working on behalf of Alan Griffiths and Worcestershire. And Abby Horton from Worcestershire Archaeology created the reconstruction. As I should say, this reconstruction, which was created by Stephen. So if you've not already seen them, there are three blogs to accompany this talk on our website, which is at www.explorethepast.com. You can also access the digital publications via the Archaeological Data Service, all our digital publications on there, using a link from the Worcestershire Archaeology page on our website. So thank you for listening. Any questions?
How long was the excavation period?
So the project ran from 2017 to 22. The